"You don't belong here." He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, and Jade Okonkwo didn't flinch. She just set her gear bag down on the bench, unzipped it, and pulled out her wraps like he hadn't said a word. This happened at Ironside Combat Centre in Hamilton, Ontario. Not some backwater gym. Ironside had been around for over 2 decades. Regional champions trained there. It had a wall of trophies you could see from the parking lot. And it had, apparently, 3 men who'd decided, within 30 seconds of meeting a woman they'd never seen before, that she didn't deserve to be in the building. Their names were Trevor Holst, Bryce Caldwell, and a guy everyone just called Sutter. All 3 held black belts. All 3 had been at Ironside long enough to think of it as their personal territory. Jade Okonkwo was 29 years old. She'd driven 40 minutes from Brantford that morning because Ironside had just hired her as a part-time instruction assistant. A contract role, helping run the adult beginner classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She had a background in Krav Maga and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, had trained for 6 years before her enlistment, and had spent another 4 years with the Canadian Army as part of a combat arms unit out of CFB Petawawa. She'd been to Mali. She'd done things that would not appear on any public record. But when she walked into that gym on a Tuesday morning to get oriented before her first class, none of that was visible to Trevor, Bryce, or Sutter. What was visible, apparently, was that she was a woman, and that she was black, and that she had the audacity to walk onto their mat without introducing herself to them first. "You a new member?" Trevor asked. He was standing near the heavy bags, arms crossed. He had the kind of build that happens when someone lifts seriously for a decade and stops listening to anyone who doesn't. "Staff," Jade said simply. That's when Bryce started laughing. Not a discreet chuckle, he threw his head back. "Staff," he repeated, to no one in particular, like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Sutter walked over. He was the quietest of the 3, but there was something about the way he moved that made it clear he was the one they deferred to. He looked Jade up and down in a way that would have made most people look away. "What kind of staff?" he asked. "Instruction assistant. I start Thursday." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. The 3 of them exchanged a look, the kind that doesn't need words because it's been rehearsed too many times. "Right," Sutter said finally. "Well, good luck with that." And they walked off toward the far mat, already talking amongst themselves, already laughing. Jade watched them go. She finished wrapping her hands. Then she went to find the gym manager. The manager was a man named Gordon Ashby. He'd owned Ironside for 18 years, took pride in the place, and had hired Jade specifically because the women's beginner enrollment had been climbing, and he wanted a female instructor who could handle herself. He'd seen her credentials. He'd been impressed. When Jade mentioned what had happened, calmly, without drama, Gordon sighed in a way that told her this wasn't the first complaint about those 3. "They're competitive guys," he said, which is what people say when they don't want to say something more accurate. "I understand that," Jade said. "They mean well." Jade let that one sit in the air for a moment. "Mr. Ashby," she said, "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to do a job. I just want you to know what the environment is like, so you're not surprised later." Gordon nodded, said he'd have a word with them, and didn't. That Thursday, Jade ran her first class. 12 adults, mostly women, one older gentleman named, well, he introduced himself as Len, and he was 71 years old and had the posture of someone who'd been told his whole life to stand up straight and actually listened. The class went well. Jade was calm, precise, and funny when she needed to be. She had a way of explaining technique that made people feel capable rather than hopeless, which is rarer than it sounds. Afterward, while she was putting equipment away, Trevor came over. "Not bad," he said. He had his arms crossed again, always with the crossed arms. "Thank you," Jade said. "You did Krav? Or is it BJJ? Both?" He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're filing information rather than responding to it. "You ever spar?" Sure, we do open mat Saturdays. You should come. There was something in the invitation. It wasn't friendly, or not purely friendly. It was the kind of invitation that's also a test. Come see how you do against real competition. See how you hold up when we're not holding back. Jade recognized it immediately. Maybe I will, she said. She came back Saturday, and this is where the story changes. When Jade walked in that morning, the mat was already busy. 8 or 9 people running drills, a couple of guys sparring in the corner. Trevor, Bryce, and Sutter were together again. They were always together, running a grappling sequence near the wall. Some of the regulars recognized her from Thursday. A few nodded. One woman who'd been in the beginner class gave a small wave. Sutter saw Jade and said something to the other two. Then all 3 of them walked over. You came, Bryce said. I said I might, Jade replied. You want to roll? Trevor asked. Now, let's slow down here for just a second, because this is the part that matters. When Trevor said roll, he meant spar, specifically grappling. No striking. Groundwork. Submissions. It's the kind of training that strips away everything except what you actually know, because there's nowhere to hide on the mat. You either know what you're doing or you don't. Size helps. Strength helps. But technique is the thing that doesn't lie. Jade had been training since she was 23. She had 6 years before the Army and 4 years of continued training during service, including close-quarters combat instruction under a warrant officer who had competed at the national level. She didn't talk about this. She'd mentioned her background to Gordon during hiring, but she hadn't volunteered the details to anyone at Ironside because it wasn't relevant to teaching a beginner class on hip escapes and guard posture. Trevor Holst had a black belt, 210 pounds, and the assumption that this woman who'd come to teach beginners was somewhere in the white to blue range in terms of actual skill. He was about to find out. Sure, Jade said. Let's roll. The first round was with Bryce. He came at her hard from the start, not recklessly, but with the kind of controlled aggression that tells you someone is trying to end it quickly and cleanly. He shot for a double-leg takedown inside the first 8 seconds. Jade let him commit to it, stepped offline, and came down on his back before he'd even processed that the takedown had failed. She moved through a body triangle to a rear naked choke in 11 seconds. Bryce tapped before she had to finish the squeeze. He sat up looking at the mat, just staring at it. The rest of the room had gone quiet. Bryce stood, said nothing, and walked to the edge of the mat. Trevor was already standing up before anyone asked. He was bigger than Bryce, and he was better. He lasted longer, about 40 seconds. He tried to use his weight early, got her to the ground, and for a moment, it looked like he had the control he wanted. Then Jade shifted her hips, created a frame he hadn't anticipated, swept him with a scissor motion, and from the top she walked her way into an armbar with the kind of patience that's almost meditative. Trevor tapped at the elbow pressure. He stood, rubbed his arm, and said nothing. Sutter was watching all of this with his jaw set. He'd been the quietest one. He was also the most technically refined of the 3. You could see it in how he moved during drills, how he watched rather than reacted. He knew what he'd just watched. He understood what it meant. He stepped onto the mat. He lasted 53 seconds. He tried a leg lock entry that was legitimately good, technically clean, well-timed, and Jade's defense was immediate and surgical. She didn't scramble. She didn't panic. She reversed the position with a fluency that made it look like she'd been waiting for exactly that move, took his back, and from there, the choke was inevitable. When he tapped, he sat there for a long moment before standing. The room was completely silent. Nobody said anything right away. That's the thing about a moment like that. Nobody quite knows what register to respond in. The 3 of them had just been submitted, in sequence, on their home mat, by a woman who'd shown up to teach their Tuesday beginner class. The cognitive adjustment required for that is significant. Gordon, who had been watching from the office doorway, walked quietly back inside. One of the women near the far wall let out a long breath. Then Len, 71 years old, impeccable posture, slow clapped. Once, twice, 3 times. Jade pulled her hair back and got a drink of water. Trevor, to his credit, came to her afterward. His expression had shifted into something more complicated than embarrassment. "Where did you train?" he asked. "Here and there," she said. "You're really good. Thank you." He nodded, seemed like he was working towards something. "I was out of line," he said, "on Tuesday." Jade looked at him for a moment. "You were," she said. She didn't add anything, didn't soften it or qualify it, just let it stand. Trevor nodded again and walked away. Here's what Jade didn't know when she arrived at Ironside that morning. And here's what you need to know, because it turns the whole thing from a gym story into something considerably more serious. Sutter's full name was David Sutter. He was 41 years old, worked in insurance, and had, for approximately 3 years, been telling people at Ironside that he had a background in the Canadian Special Operations Forces. He'd mentioned it in passing conversations, let it become part of how people understood him. Never exactly claimed a formal credential, but created a strong impression that was never corrected. Gordon Ashby, who believed vaguely in the story, had let Sutter run an advanced self-defense seminar at the gym the previous spring, drawing in roughly 30 participants who each paid $85 for what was marketed as operational close-quarters methodology. The problem was that David Sutter had no service record whatsoever. He'd applied to the forces at 24, not been accepted, and had been training in martial arts in the civilian world ever since. He'd built a skill set, a real one, which was why nobody had pushed back, but the claimed background was fiction. Jade had known something was off from early in their role. There were gaps in his pressure that someone with actual CQC experience wouldn't have. His ground control was sport-focused in a way that real operational training tends to reroute over time. She didn't say anything in the moment because it wasn't the moment. But afterward, when Gordon pulled her aside and mentioned Sutter's background in passing, she said quietly, "He didn't serve." Gordon blinked. "What? His movement is entirely sport. No one with operational training moves like that on the ground. He's a good athlete. He didn't serve." Gordon went quiet for a while. What followed took about 3 weeks. Jade wasn't the one who filed anything. She was careful about that. She mentioned what she'd observed to Gordon, and she was factual and precise. Gordon, to his credit, took it seriously. He asked a few questions. He reached out to someone he trusted. Within 2 weeks, he had a clear enough picture that he quietly canceled Sutter's standing invitation to instruct at Ironside and removed the promotional material for the seminar from the gym's website. Sutter came in one more time after that, walked in like he owned the place, and Gordon met him at the door. We don't know exactly what was said. Gordon never repeated it. But Sutter left, and he didn't come back. The seminar participants who'd been misled, some of them were contacted by Ironside directly. Gordon offered refunds. It was the right thing to do, and it cost him money, and he did it anyway. As for the claims of special operations background, those went to the appropriate place. In Canada, misrepresenting military service, particularly in the context of financial gain, falls under federal fraud provisions. Sutter's case ended up being reviewed. He cooperated partially, likely because his lawyer told him to, and the outcome involved a fine and conditions on future commercial activity. It was not a nothing consequence. It was also not the decade in prison some people might have hoped for. But it was something. Bryce stopped coming to open mat. Not immediately, and maybe not because of this specifically, but he stopped. People drift from gyms. It happens. Trevor came to Jade's beginner class one Thursday. Not to participate, he just came in, sat against the wall, and watched. After the class, he told her she was a better teacher than he'd expected. "You expected me to be bad at it?" she asked. "I expected you to be fine at it," he said. "You're actually good at it." She told him she appreciated that. She meant it. The women's beginner class grew. By the end of Jade's second month, it had doubled. By the 4th month, they'd added a second day to the schedule. A couple of women in that class had stories that weren't unlike Jade's in certain ways. They'd been told they didn't belong somewhere. They'd been laughed at, talked over, made to feel like intruders in spaces that should have been open to them. What they found in that class wasn't just technique. It was a room where their presence wasn't questioned, where a woman who'd been through worse than most of them could ever imagine stood at the front of the room and showed them how to use their body as something they controlled. One woman, she'd been through a situation nobody should go through, told Jade after a class that she'd driven 40 minutes to get there because she'd heard about the instructor. "Who told you about me?" Jade asked. "Len," the woman said. Jade looked across the room. Len was packing up his bag, moving slowly, with that perfect posture. He looked up, met her eyes, and gave her a single nod. There's a line that circulates in martial arts circles. You've probably heard a version of it, about how the mat doesn't care about anything except what you know. It doesn't care how you look, where you're from, what people assumed about you at the door. The mat is the most honest room in the building. Jade Okonkwo walked into a room where 3 men had already decided the outcome. She let them think that for a little while, and then, on a Saturday morning in Hamilton, Ontario, she quietly, methodically, and without a word of argument, showed them exactly how wrong they were. Some lessons have to be learned on the ground.